So for this tutorial we're going to look at UVW unwrapping and texturing in 3ds Max 2015. It's a similar principle to all the other ones, but for this one I'm going to show you 3 stages of texturing in UVW mapping. We're going to look at initially doing a box, a standard box, then we're going to have a look at something a bit more advanced, and then we're going to have a look at a human head, how we texture that. Okay, so I'm just going to talk you through the actual texturing part of it. I'll briefly show you a bit of the texturing side, but yeah, that's down to you, the texturing part of it. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so let's imagine we've got this editable poly here. This is our box. What we're going to do is we're going to come to our modify list drop down. We're going to choose ourselves an unwrap UVW. Okay, we're going to open our UV editor, and then in polygon mode, at the moment all of those faces that we've got selected are on top of each other. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to separate those out. Okay, so I'm going to hold Control A and make sure they're all highlighted. Now, there's a few ways of doing this, but the way I like to do it is I'm just going to come to mapping, flatten mapping, and press OK. And what that does is that divides out each of those faces individually. So if I click on this one, I know my top face is this one here, front one, and so on and so forth. Now if you wanted, you could go and texture that, but at the moment there's sort of lines in between, there are gaps in between all of them. Now to explain a little bit about the UV editor, if I zoom out, you can see it's just an infinite box that keeps on going. The box that you care about is this little checkerboard one here. It doesn't have to be checkerboard, I can turn that off if it makes it clearer. But anything that you want to be seen when you're saving it needs to be inside this box, because that's what you see when you texture. Okay, everything needs to be compacted back into this box. So at the moment none of these are connected, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start connecting these back together, but in a way that suits me so that I can texture each and every face, because the original way was a box on top of each other. So I want to paint different textures on each one of these faces. To do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into edge mode and click on one of these edges. Now the edge I've selected goes red, and you should see a corresponding edge becomes blue. What that means is this should link to here. Okay, these two edges are joint, so let's zoom in here. You can see my red one, the blue one will be there as well. So the edge of this polygon and the edge of this polygon meets here, and at the moment they're unstitched, so I'm going to stitch them back together. Now I've got all of these options here. I can stitch to target, which means this will join to here. Stitch to average, so they'll meet somewhere in the middle. We're going to use that one later. I can stitch to source, so I can stitch the original one I collected, or stitch custom. I'll just hit stitch custom there for now. If I move this out of the way, so I'm going to go polygon mode, click on my polygon, just going to move that up. You can see those are still connected. Okay, and we can move those out the way for now to make this a bit less confusing. Back into edge mode, and click on the top edge now, and you'll see we've got this corresponding now. It's up to you how you set it out. This is my top face, so I'm going to keep my top face right in the middle of my box. So I'm going to connect the other side now. Red line, blue line, stitch. Click on this side, red line, blue line, stitch. Exactly the same for this side. Okay, so far I've got all of them except for the bottom face. The bottom face isn't attached at the moment, you see. So I now need to attach that. It's up to you how you do it. I'm just going to attach mine there. You get this sort of cross shape, alright? That's our unwrap pretty much there and available. I'm now able to paint on each one of these surfaces, and I'm going to show you in Photoshop exactly what I mean by that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pack these back in. There's a button here called pack. Now what that will do is it will pack these UV so they'll fit back in the box that we'll be able to see. If I was to try and render out and texture from here, the only part of it I'd see is the bit that's inside the box. So if I press pack custom, fits it back inside the box for me. Turn the checkboard on if you're really confused. That doesn't matter whether that's on or off, it just helps your viewport. I'm going to come up to tools. I'm going to come down to render UVW template. Out of preference I always turn off seam edges. Seam edges are these green lines around the edge. When you render it, it's always quite helpful to turn off seam edges. How big do you want the textural density? How big do you want your texture? So I'm going to make it 1024 pixels by 1024 pixels. That's the size of this, a square, decent size. Probably a little bit too big for this. I could do 512, 512, but I'm going to do 1024. It's always a square. Okay, so I'll turn off seam edges, I'll leave the size, and I'll just press render UV template. And that will make this shape here. Don't worry too much if the lines aren't resolving properly, so you can't quite clearly see it. If I zoom in and out, the lines become more apparent, but don't worry too much if it's not. It's only because the lines are so thin it's not showing them. So if I come up and save this image, I'm going to save it somewhere useful. So I'm going to save mine just in a textures folder. It's always handy to have a folder together with the actual textures you want. I'm going to call mine box UVW test. It's up to you what you call it. Call it something relevant. I'm going to save mine as a JPEG just for now. Hit save. Happy days. I can close that. I can close that, and I can come into Photoshop, and I can open up that UVW texture. Alright. Okay. So I'm in Photoshop. Find that UVW map I just made. There it is. Box UVW test. And if and when it loads up, there you go. You can see that the lines are there. Now, just to explain, anything that I draw outside of those lines will not be apparent. It won't exist. All this black area here doesn't actually exist. So all of this doesn't exist. Anything that I paint here isn't going to show up in Photoshop, alright? Anything outside, I mean in 3ds Max, anything outside of these borders won't be seen in 3ds Max. So if I come into place, download a few, a website I like for textures, cgtextures.com is here. There's some good textures here. You get 15 meg allowance a day. It's a good website for getting textures like this. So back in Photoshop, I've just gone to File, Place. I did that a bit quick, and I've placed in a cardboard texture I found. Hit Enter to accept. You can use the Move tool. No, you don't have to be exact. You can be if you're doing precise, but for this tutorial, it's not the end of the world for me. So I'm just going to scale it down a little bit and make a texture that fits. Now mine's overlapping a little bit. If I want that to be perfectly tiled, I might sort that, put that as a square, so I can line those up. If I want to line it up perfectly, I could change the opacity right down. I mean, you can see I've come over a little bit, but I'm not too worried about precision right this moment in time. What I'm going to do is just hold Alt and drag and copy that out just quickly so I can show you how this is going to look in 3ds Max. I'm just making myself a simple cardboard box with a simple cardboard texture. Alright, okay. Make sure all the lines are filled, so everything inside of those squares is filled. Doesn't matter about any of this. Doesn't matter about the outside. There's a bit of a black line there. Is that one? Yep. And then ensure the whole of your box is filled, right? So as I said, the scribbles that I made before, you're not going to see those, and I'll show you in 3ds Max on a texture what's going to happen. Okay. Now, just so we can differentiate what's the top and bottom, I'm going to add some of these sort of decal stickers here. I'll change the layer in a minute. Right, change those down a little bit. Pop these on. That'll do. Right, you can see there's a massive variant in colour. Move that to the top layer. Now, at the moment, that just looks like I've stuck that on top. They don't look like they're similar textures. So what I'm going to do is come over to blend modes. Click on the normal drop down, choose darken, and you can see it blends that texture from the darken. It will blend that background into one another so they look like they're a similar shape. Now I could, if I really wanted to, go in, paint some detail and whatnot over in there. So if I just go paint just quickly, I mean I could get loads of vinyl sort of PNGs and paint some more detail in. Oops, let's make this on a new layout. Mean to do that. Okay, there we go. Got there in the end. Change our brush size up a little bit. I've got quite a soft. Change to quite a soft brush. You could just paint in outside of a box. I'm holding Shift to make a straight line. Okay. Just as an example, you could then copy that over if you wanted. I'm going to change that. Something like multiply, overlay. They're two of my favourite blend modes. Let's change multiply. Might change the opacity down a little bit of that layout. Okay. Right, so quick and simple, but it will do a job. Alright, let's change that over. It's a bit slapdash, but I just want to give you a really clear visual of what we've done here, alright? Okay, so Now what we're going to do is I'm going to come to File, Save As. I'm going to save it in the same place as a JPEG. JPEG or target by default I like to save as, but I'm going to save this as a JPEG. Just call it box text. Save. Doesn't matter too much on my sizing for this. Come back into 3ds Max. Done with my unwrap, so I unselect and hit M to bring up my material editor. Should hopefully be familiar with basic texturing, because UVW is more of an advanced form of texturing, but hopefully you've got at least a basic understanding of all the texture editor. Might do a further tutorial at a more basic level in future, sort of help. But what we're going to do is we're going to add that texture we just made in Photoshop. We're going to add as a diffuse map. Diffuse is the main colour, so I'm going to click on this little box here that says none. If and when my slow computer, the next window pops up, I'm going to choose bitmap because I want to choose an image. It doesn't help I've got 3 versions of 3ds Max open, I'm sure. Okay, right, bitmap. I'm going to choose textures. I'm going to choose that texture I made. Okay, so here's my texture. Come back up to this layer. Looks good. Right, so you can see the areas outside that I painted. This is the whole texture's come in. Now, what we've done basically is we've said we only want to assign a certain part of that texture to here. Anything in the black space isn't going to apply. So let's drag and drop that, or click apply. Show shading material in viewport. And there we go. There's our texture applied, alright? So you'll notice none of that, the red area that I made before, none of that's applied. It was only things inside the rectangles, inside the UVW map, yeah? I mean, could do a hell of a lot more with that. Change the sizing down a little bit, make it fit better. And that's the joy of Photoshop. I can then go back in, edit the layers. Change that right down. I'm holding Alt and Shift. File, save. So overwrite my JPEG. Done. Done. And you can even bring in the PSD. 3ds Max lets you use the PSD, and that will live update as you see there, so the sizing. So it didn't take a second to correct that texture, right? Okay, so that's in a nutshell basic UVW texturing. Now, what if your object isn't quite as simple as a box? Well, let's move on and have a look at some slightly more advanced shapes. Now, I'm not saying we're going too advanced. You're all going to have different requirements on what you're trying to texture. But just for this, I'm going to have a look at a shape like this a little bit. Now, I won't go into how I'd texture it, but I will go into how I would break down my UVW map. So, just got basic desk, CRT monitor. I was going for sort of an old-fashioned scene before. Nothing too out of the ordinary. Now you can see the construction lines and things there. That's going to divide up our mesh a bit unnaturally. Now there might be a little bit more detail than I needed, but just constructed it to give an interesting challenge. So I'm coming into UVW map. I turn on polygon mode because it's handy. Control A to highlight all. It's just the same as before, and the more you do this, the more you repeat this, the better you'll get at it. It's the only way that you can perfect things like this. You click open UV editor, and there's my mesh all on top of each other, nice and confusing. Now, those of you that get a bit lazy, you can have a look and say, oh, I might try and map top and bottom, and then you've got the top and the bottom of the desk and so on and so forth. But don't, I mean, for this, I prefer to construct my own mesh and make sure everything's set up the way I like it. I mean, this is only basic. You can go into texturing in real detail, but I'm teaching you sort of the very entry-level sort of UVW mapping, because it's quite advanced in the respect that UVW mapping is tough, but I want to teach you it on a level that hopefully everyone will be able to understand. So I'm going to come into flat mapping, press OK, and that divides up every single one of those faces. Okay, so each of those faces are divided. So I can set about now reconstructing my faces back together. So let's have a look at this. Okay, so that's the top of my desk. Alright, I'm just going to move that up to there. So this is the top, as you can see. Now this little button here, select element by UV toggle, basically what that does is when I click on one shape, it will select everything that is attached to that shape, okay? So it selects everything, all the faces that are attached to it, so I'm just going to turn that off. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start just as you did before the box. Right, I've clicked on this edge here, as you can see it's that one. Somewhere, there should have been a blue face. Right, let's try the edge. Okay. Right, let's see what we got here then. Let's start constructing the mesh the other way around. Alright. So blue side is showing up, brilliant. Right, let's click on that edge, connect, and you can see the side that was connected to it. Do the same up here, and now I've got the sides of the shape. Now, again, it's up to you how you construct your mesh. It's what you're comfortable working with. I quite like a quite plain, simple, open, simple mesh like this. Let's see what else we've got in here. We've got the underside of this table. So, probably got the drawers to come in. And you decide what's best for you, but it flattens out the whole of your mesh, so you can work on different sides. And you can, well, I don't want to link those two. If I try and link those two together, they're already part of the same mesh, and similar there. So that would probably crash 3ds Max. Certainly would give me results I wasn't looking for. Alright, so just check all that. Yep, okay, that's all linked, that's fine. Now I think some of these are going to be linked to inner faces. Yeah, there you go. So this is like the inside of the drawers. Alright, maybe that's not exactly where I want that to go, so let's stitch. Let's try that again in a minute. Remember, you can go into polygon mode and see which faces you're working with. Okay, so this one would go inside there. So that would connect to that edge, which is down here. Okay, so we could stitch these. Don't have to link them all, but it's about linking the bits that you're familiar with, okay? Just making a mesh that's neat and tidy that you're comfortable working on, alright? Let's try that. Okay, and we're piecing together all these little bits we've got left over. Alright, okay, let's not do that bit. Here's the underside of the table. Ensuring we're going to do all this. Now, what I'm going to do is piece all these bits together just to familiarise you with sort of how to build a UVW for a different kind of mesh. And then once we've done that, I'm going to move on and show you how to build a UVW map for a human head, okay, which is a completely different sort of shape. Hopefully by then we'll have a good understanding of exactly what how to UVW texture. Alright, so just link there, pretty much there. Alright, this might not be the neatest, certainly doesn't look wonderful, but I'm trying to do it as quick as possible to be, just to show you. I just want you guys to get familiar with linking shapes together. So I've got all of the inside, which to be fair might not necessarily have a texture, but I can make sure that flows with the rest of it. I've got all the outside, and then I've got these shelves here, which in theory could then link up here, because you can see the blue line there. Repack that all in. Now, if you wanted to, you have to be careful. Obviously, you don't want to scale one section without the other, because then the textures will become, basically you ruin the texture quality. If you expand, say, the top half of something, if I was to say scale this section right up, I could scale it up, make sure it fits in there, move all this around a little bit. But then when I add a texture to this, I mean, I can rotate it. When I add a texture to this part, that texture is going to be a different resolution. It's going to be slightly larger than, say, this texture here, which I'm scaling down. So try and keep them all in proportion, unless you're intending on different parts having different scale textures, okay? But then I could do just as I did before, tools, render UVW template, start painting it in Photoshop, connect it together. Now, I'm not saying this is the correct and only way of doing a table, but I'm just trying to get you familiar with target stitching, custom stitching, breaking them apart, making your own UVW texture up, okay? So, that's this one, and then hopefully the last step will really further embed all this. So, we're going to close this window, and what we're going to do is we're going to make a mesh for this head here, okay? Okay, simple poly by poly modeled head. What we're going to do is we're going to construct a mesh here, sort of unwrap this face. Alright, and I'll show you an example of the type of face meshes that people make. Probably probably won't go into the detail of actually making it myself, but I will certainly show you the principle behind how you do it. So first thing to remember when you're UVW texturing something is to turn off turbo smooth, okay? Basically, if I try and texture with turbo smooth on, I've got lots and lots of polygons here. It's always best to turn it off. I hit 7 on my keyboard, it brings up the shortcut, so I'll go from 310 polys to 2580. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't really fancy trying to UVW texture and unpack all those. So turn it off. I'm going to add myself a UVW unwrap layer. I can just drag it under my turbo smooth, but I'll turn off the light bulb. Turbo smooth is none. Okay, try and remember not to texture it with that one. Just as before, polygon mode. Well, it's up to you how you want to do this bit, but I can Control A, press UV editor, and apparently that is the texture map for the face. Now, if I tried to paint on that now, it wouldn't really resemble a face because you've got all these polygons on top of one another. Alright, so see, there's no real definition. Now what I'm going to do is break this down in a different manner than I have done before, okay? Sort of unpack it nicely as a face. I'm going to make this sort of flat face that it's easier to texture. An option I've got turned on is ignore back facing. Basically what that means is if I click and drag all those faces, you can see, it's done what it says on the tin, it's ignored back facing, it's ignored all the faces at the back, it's just selected the top ones. Now, if you want to add a face, you press Control and click, but if you want to take one away, you hold Alt and click, and I'm going to Alt click, or I'm going to Alt drag, it's up to you how you do it and which viewport you do it. I'm just going to minimise that, and I'm going to Alt and drag a box here, just to unhighlight some of the faces. Okay, some because I had ignore back facing on, some of these haven't turned up, and the kind of faces I'm going to go for, I just want to make a selection of the front. I'm going to make almost like a mask for the front of the face, and then I'm going to connect the two side parts as well. So let's try and make this symmetrical, meaning that I've done it the same on both sides, which I haven't because that face there. Okay, that's the kind of look that I'm going for, right? So I've just got the front of the face. Now if I open up the editor again, you wouldn't know that I've only got the front of the face. So I want to remove this, break it away from the rest of the face, but I want it to be flat. Okay? So I've got these projection tools. All I've done is scroll down the side here, and I've scrolled down to projection tools, and I'm looking for a planar map, which is basically a flat map. Click on that planar map, and it will flatten, and you can see that gizmo, that yellow line there, it's flattened in that axis, okay? It's not the axis I was looking for because I can't really texture a face from top to bottom. So I'm going to press on X. No, let's come up with the side, so that's the profile. If I look there, that's how it's textured it. Let's try Y. Perfect. Okay, that's exactly what I was looking for. Okay, so I've flattened that face so that I can texture that. So I'm going to hit Enter on my keyboard. That accepts that change so that I can move this. I'm just going to move it out of my grid for now. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the two sides. So what I'm doing here, you see those green lines have changed. I'm defining the lines. I'm defining the UVW texture myself. I might show you pelt mapping at a later date, but for now we're just going to look at UV texturing and using projection to do that. Okay. So I'm in side view. I've still got ignore back facing on. I'm going to click and drag and I'll highlight all these faces, and you can see because I've got ignore back faces, it's ignored all the back faces. But it does have the front half of the face that I've just made a selection for, which I don't want. So what I'm going to do is pull back up my window, and I'm just going to hold Alt and drag over that, and it will unselect all of those faces, but it will keep this part of the selection here, so the side of the face. Okay. And just as before, I'm going to come down to my projection mapping. I'm going to flatten that. See, it's in the wrong axis. This time I don't want Y. I'm going to want the X axis, so it's a sideways on. Press Enter to select, and click and drag that, and I'm going to just place it sort of there for now, somewhere along the side of the head. And we're going to move this around and link all this back together in a sec, so don't worry. What we're going to do for the last part is just repeat that step, but this time I can just click and drag over here, so it's all the faces remaining, which should be at the other side of the head. Planar mapping, and it's already aligned to X because that's the last one we used. But this time I want to put it on the other side, so what I'm going to do with them, still selected, hit mirror tool, hit Enter. I'm just going to move that to about there, alright? Okay, I could then try and make sure they line up perfectly, align them and sort of get everything right, but I'm I'm just going to go by eye for now in the interest of time, but that looks perfect for me. Okay, so now I want to connect these edges back together. I like the flatten map, but I've got these gaps here, and as you remember before, any gaps between the shapes, basically it's only what's inside that gets textured. Anything outside doesn't get textured, and there'll be a big line between these unless I join them back up. So I'm going to come into vertex mode, zoom in a bit, and what I'm going to do, click on the vertex, it goes red, the adjoining vertex will go blue. I'm just going to click and drag that so it's close, not touching, but close to it. Alright, I'll show you why it's not going to be touching in a minute. So I'm just going to work my way around one side. I'm going to do this a bit rough and ready so that I can be quick. Okay. Oops. Okay, link that to that, to that, to that, and so on and so forth. Okay, let's do the neck. I mean, we're stretching these polys, so we probably need to come back in after we've connected these and make them fit properly. Oops, just because I was waffling on, I missed that. Okay, so I might want to come and sort of try and turn these into better polygons, sort of more rectangular looking rather than these random shapes. There we go. Just for now, just quickly, I'm just going to move that down a bit. Alright, not perfect, but that will do. Repeat the same steps to the other side. Okay. Right. I'm just going to pause the video here and finish this side, and then when I come back, we'll finish it off. Okay, yeah, so as you can see now, finish this other side, change the topology a little bit so it flows a little bit better. It's still not perfect, but in the interest of time, let's get this finished. Okay, so these still aren't connected, there's a little bit of a gap. Now I've got a couple of ways that we can do this. I'm just going to move those ones there actually so they're not inside one another. We've got a couple of ways we can do this. I could then weld all these parts together, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to come into edge mode, okay, and I'm just going to double click now. Up to you in the way you do it, but I'll do part by part so it's a bit easier. I'm going to select, I'm holding control, I'm going to select these green edges here, the seams, alright. Now, the stitch tools we use so far, we've just used Stitch Custom really, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one called Stitch to Average, and what that will do is it will work out the difference between this gap and it will meet somewhere in the middle. So let's click that. Very nice, okay, so it's Stitch to Average, it's found it in the middle, meaning they're joined together now, but they're joined together in the middle, so I kind of tried to keep that topology, that geometry sort of together in a fairly neat way. Not that anything about what I'm doing here is particularly neat, but hey, it's just the principles I'm trying to teach you really. The more and more you practice this, the better you'll get. But conscious of time, so let's select these, stitch to average. Very nice, okay. Now have a look at that. Right, okay. Let's just move that back in. That's the whole head completed, that's all stitched together. Now if I turn that on just before, if you remember now, if I click on one, that object is all part of the same thing, but it's flattened so I can texture it. I'm going to pack that back in, it's up to you if you want to turn it round, scale it, but I'm happy with that, and that basically means I'm ready to apply texture now. Now you might have seen maps like this, UVW face maps, okay, this is kind of the way you would texture a face, it's just simple Google search, but basically we've made the flattened map. I left a gap for the ears, hadn't modelled the ears in just yet because I ain't got that far with the tutorial I was modelling that I was showing people. But here basically you've got all of your skin going together, it looks seamless, okay, but this is what a flattened UVW map would look like. Obviously the hair comes in the side, but this looks similar to the map that we were sort of working with, okay. You'd add some hair in here, you could divide this up, move it up if you really wanted more detail, paint in some detail here for eyebrows, mouth and so on and so forth, okay. And the way you do that is obviously you go to Tools, Render UVW Template. I turn off Seam Edges because if you don't go all the way to the edge, sometimes it leaves a green border. Render Template, and you could just save that template, open it in Photoshop, paint over it, quite as simple, okay. So that's three ways, three sort of models, sort of variety of difficulty that we've just had a look at there. And yeah, so hopefully by now you're now familiar with UVW texturing. If you've got any questions or any queries or anything like that, please just ask a question, drop it in an email, or put it in a post below the video, and I'll try and get back to you. Okay, thanks for listening. Cheers. Bye.